for loving me.
While you're standing, I want you to lift your hands and I want you to pray one more time before we start today. Say, God, because of this month, I make good choices in relationships. If you're single, I want you to pray, I go forward without fear into marriage because I know what to look for, and pray in the Spirit. If you're married, I want you to pray, I'm a source of wise counsel for my children, for my friends, for my family. I know the advice to give them. Wherever you are, I want you to pray for wisdom in this area. I want you to pray that because of the teachings of this month, you will have an impact in your own life. You will have an impact on those around you. In this important area, we will not lack. Keep praying. I want you to think about this. Think about your friends. Think about yourself. And think about how you can take this forward with you. In Jesus' name, we have prayed. Amen. Okay, let's go ahead and have our seats. You know, when I realized I was going to do the Sunday after Deeper, I was kind of like, oh, great. So be energetic for me today. I know you might be tired. I feel you. I've been sick all week. You know, I always get sick when I go to Nigeria for reboot camp. And I used to blame Nigeria. I used to call it Nigerian COVID. But now, after being sick this week in Texas, I have to admit, it's camp sickness. I was being too hard on Nigeria. Apparently, it's just church camp. But no matter how you feel, pay attention today because this is an important topic. You know, who was here last Sunday? Raise your hand if you were here around. Okay, good. So I can kind of start off from there then. I think last Sunday was a great sermon to start this month off. Because if you weren't taking seriously who you're going to marry before that sermon, you are now. So remember, what did Apostle say last Sunday? He said, who you will marry is going to affect your finances, your health, your mental well-being, even how long you live. So we established last Sunday, this is one of the most important choices you're ever going to make. You know, the most important choice you will make is whether to accept Christ or not, because that impacts your eternal destiny. But can I tell you something? The second most important choice you're going to make is who you're going to marry, because that's going to impact everything else. So we know this is important. The question that we need to ask today is, okay, how do we make a good choice then? Like, it's great to know it's important, but if we don't know how to make a good choice, it's not really that helpful. It's just scary. But that's why you had to come back today and not just, quit going to church after Deeper, right? Okay. So, one thing I want to warn you about this sermon is that there's a lot of nuance to this topic. So, if you kind of tune me out after one point, you're going to end up at an extreme. Make sure you follow along, because there's a lot of balance that you need to have on this subject to really get it right. All right, we're going to get right into it because we're going to do a Q&A later. So make sure if you have questions that come up, write them down. Let's jump into it. So point number one is you need to get rid of unimportant filters. You need to get rid of unimportant filters. You see, today's sermon is called Love Filter. So we're not saying don't have filters. We're going to talk about the right filters to have later. But a lot of you are holding on to very unimportant filters. You see, when you're dating, there are negotiables and there are non-negotiables. But many of you have things on your non-negotiables that really don't matter, that you're never going to think about after the wedding day. And that can actually be a huge issue. And so first thing we're going to talk about is this. Keep what is important, important. Let go of the rest. Let go of the rest. And it's kind of funny that as Christians, most of us believe that we should let God mold our plan for our life. We think that it's not just about what we want, it's about what God wants. But when it comes to this area of dating, we just throw that out the window. When it comes to dating, it's like, oh, it's all about what I want, and here's the list, God. let's not be that way. Let's be consistent in our theology across all areas of our life. Because one thing you need to realize is that when you're looking for a spouse, you're not ordering a custom product. God did not make someone for you. There's no soulmates in Christianity. That is really hard for a lot of people to accept. Mostly women, I'm not going to lie. But there aren't. There's no one who was made for you. And so when you go to God with this specification list, you're going to him as a consumer looking for a custom product. And it's not out there. And that's why, first thing we're talking about, like I said, get rid of unimportant filters. So, here are 5 reasons why you need to rethink your spec. Number 1, you play stupid games, you're going to win stupid prizes. So, does anyone remember last Sunday when Apostle called up one of the audience members who had been married a while, and he asked him what he valued in his marriage? Can anyone remember some of the things he said? Yes, he talked a lot about friendship. He talked a lot about understanding. I think he said understanding like 3 times. But most of us, we don't even have that as a filter, yet that's such an important thing. You see, anyone who has been married for a while will tell you that companionship is one of the biggest aspects of marriage. So, is anyone familiar with what a word cloud is? So it's when you have a bunch of words and they'll all be together in a big block, and the size of the word demonstrates how important it was. So for example, if they do a survey, the bigger the word is, the more people said that response. And then the smaller words, less people said that. So I was at a church one time, and they interviewed over 30 couples that had been married over 20 years, so couples that had really been married a while, and they made a word cloud of their responses to the question, what is the most important part of your marriage? And the 3 biggest words were companionship, encouragement, and friendship. And see, when you're single, you think it's going to be like sex and then everything else in tiny print around it. But that's just not true. It's just not true. So make no mistake, your spouse is more than a friend, but they are not less. Your spouse has to be your best friend. You're not going to be satisfied in that marriage if they're not. But see, the problem with unimportant filters is that most of us, you go into a room, and you're single, and you look around, and you start filtering people out. And you filter them out for, immediate attraction, for first impression, for wealth, for how smooth they are. And you've probably already filtered out the person that could have been that best friend based on things that you're never going to think about again after I do. That is why this is an issue. And some of you, your standards are so specific. I heard of one guy who was like a slim Yoruba woman with glasses. I was like, what if her eyesight gets really bad and she has to get like cataract surgery or something, and then she doesn't need the glasses anymore? Is she going to have to wear fake glasses for the rest of the marriage? I don't know. And then you're going to have to, maybe buy glasses for the kids. So this is even more expensive. It's so specific. And, like I said, it is important that you're attracted to your spouse. I'm not saying to marry someone who you're not attracted to. It's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is this. A lot of you would be surprised who you would be attracted to if you weren't holding on so tightly to your spec. Part of the reason you never notice anyone that looks different than that is you're only looking for that. I wanted to marry a white cowboy. And I don't know if you've noticed, but, P.O. is many things, but he is not a white cowboy. And my husband has a friend that lives in the UK, and this guy was really into very light-skinned, curvy girls. And then he got dumped hard, twice, by a light-skinned, curvy girl. So he went, he read some books, he rethought his life, 2 kids later, he's married to a dark-skinned, thin woman. And he's happy. My husband really liked short, curvy black girls when he was younger. Also got dumped hard. I see there's a pattern here with guys. So, it's not that you can't be attracted to anyone else than that image you have in your mind. So you're not open to it. So I'm not saying to marry someone who you're unattracted to. I'm saying not to hold on to one image as the only thing you can ever be attracted to. You know, if you do that, you have no room to criticize homosexuality. I want to pull up, let's media team help me with Proverbs 11, verse 22. And let's look at it in the ERV, because that was the translation that fit this the best. So I want us all to read together. 1, 2, go. A beautiful woman without good sense is like a gold ring in a pig's nose. Don't think this is just women. The leader of your household doesn't have good sense. How fun is that going to be after like 1 year? See, that's the thing. No matter how good looking someone is when you first meet them, no matter how much they wow you physically when you first meet them, once you marry them, you're going to get used to how they look. You're not going to wake up 2 years later and be like, wow. They're not even going to look like that when they wake up anyway. You know, secret, not all of this is my real hair. I know people are always surprised it's a good color match, but Amazon. Anyway. You're not going to be wowed by someone every day, physically. So what's really going to determine whether you still are attracted to that person in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years or more is going to be their character. Because it can be the best looking person in the world. If they frustrate you and discourage you and tear you down, those looks will mock them. It's going to be like gold in a pig's nose. And see, I think a lot of people don't get this message who are single. They really struggle with it because they don't have the right idea of what sex looks like in marriage. A lot of single people really don't want to hear what sex is like in marriage. When married people try to tell them, they're like, no, that's not going to be my marriage. We're going to be the exception. And I was there. I was single at one point too, and I thought to myself, no, that can't be true. I saw the movies. But here's the thing that is so hard to grasp when you're single, but you really need to get this. Sex in marriage takes work. It is work. It is not like the movies. Sex in marriage is less about passion and more about sacrificial love. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no passion. Just, cheer you up a little bit after what I just said. But the passion is more often stirred up intentionally than spontaneously felt in marriage. And that's why married couples who slept around with each other before they got married, oftentimes they get married and they're like, wow, why is this so hard all of a sudden? Because when you're dating, the devil wants to get you into bed. He's doing everything he can to get both of you into bed. Once you get married, his priorities completely change. Now he's doing everything he can to get you out of bed. And that's why in the world, sex is easy. The thrill of sin makes it easy. But in marriage, all of a sudden that is gone. And it takes intentional, sacrificial love to keep things going. And like I said, we've watched too many movies. You see the guy at his lady comes to him at the office, and they're like, take everything off the desk, and then bam. No one's doing that in real life. You would get fired. You have rent. I'm telling you, movies will mess you up, because in real life, here's what it's like. You're tired. You have work tomorrow. The kids are being loud. You need to wash the dishes. It's going to take intentionality. And that's why you hear these things from real-life married couples, things that you don't want to believe when you're single. You hear, they don't have sex every day. No, especially men. No one wants to hear that when they're single, but it's true. You hear that a lot of their sex is scheduled, not spontaneous. And it just shocks you, like, wow, you schedule that? But it's true. You hear that, sometimes they're not initially in the mood, and they have to intentionally put themselves in that mind frame to serve their partner. You hear that their sex life had to adapt and change as life and bodies changed. That's the truth of sex in marriage. So, you can marry that person who you think is just so fine, and you think, I will have a great sex life with them because they're just so good looking. And you're going to be shocked. Because what you saw in them that you thought would make for a good sex life was lust. And lust evaporates in marriage. In the world, sex is about lust. But in marriage, sex is about love. Lust asks, what can you do for me? How can you please me? But love asks, how can I serve you? And that's why lust will never work in a marriage. You cannot power a marriage with lust, because marriage was not designed for lust. It was designed for love. And see, that's why this idea that if I just marry someone who wows me physically when I first meet them, I'm going to have a great sex life. That's why it doesn't work. Here's what's funny. A great sex life, you're more likely to have it in your marriage if you marry someone who you have emotional safety with. You can clearly communicate with them, even about very vulnerable things. Someone who is intentional, someone who is sacrificial, and someone who's willing to put work into the marriage bed. That's the person who you're more likely to have a great sex life with, not the person who just wows you right off the bat. So remember that. I think that is the biggest stumbling block people have with getting rid of unimportant filters. And some of you might be listening and you're thinking, well, why can't I have both? Why can't I have someone who fits all these minutia, like I like their eye color, they wear glasses, and also have the important things? But here's the problem. To find that really specific spec you've built in your mind, and they also want to marry you, is kind of unlikely. So what really ends up happening in the real world is that you start to compromise on the important things so that you can get the unimportant. Did anyone listen to Halo Effect last February by Apostle? So Halo Effect was about how when someone has one good trait that you really value, it's very easy to overlook many other shortcomings. So for instance, you see someone who's handsome, you assume that they're smart. That's Halo Effect. You know what will make you really susceptible to Halo Effect? Having a very specific spec. Because now, when you see that spec and they show any interest in you, no one can talk to you. You've been waiting for them. It's the answer to your prayers. Red flags will be waving in your face, and you can't see it. That's how Samson and Delilah happened. Because when you read it, you're like, how could you be so dumb? She asked you like 3 times and showed her hand every time. I guess she was his spec. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Stop playing the game by the wrong rules. Get rid of these unimportant filters. Which brings us to point 2. So this is point 2 under why you need to rethink your spec. Point 2. You are filtering for things that are guaranteed to change. You are filtering for things that are guaranteed to change. There's not a lot of guarantees in life and in marriage. You don't know where life's going to take you. You don't know what trials you're going to have to go through. But there's one thing that you can know for sure on your wedding day. Neither of you are going to look like that in 20 years. That is one of the certainties in life. And that's why when you filter for temporary things for a lifelong commitment, it's not helpful. It's just not helpful. And some of you may have heard the previous section and thought to yourself, well, but I just think my spec is the only thing I could ever be attracted to. But I want to ask you this. Is anyone out there who's single, is your spec currently an old man or an old woman? There are no hands. You do realize, though, that if you're going to have a lifelong marriage, someday that's going to have to be your spec. You're going to have to be attracted to that. So that's the thing. Even if you marry someone who perfectly matches that image you have in your head, they aren't going to stay that way. You're going to have to let go of that image eventually. So you might as well start letting go of it a little bit now. And don't even think it's going to take 20 years. I've only been married 4 years. And I have some dresses that I used to wear a lot when we were dating that recently I just gave up. I was like, I'm never going to fit back into these. I need to just let this go. And so I gave them to one of my friends, and she wore the dress one time, and I pointed out to another friend of mine that, oh yeah, that's one of my old dresses. I actually gave that to her. And that other friend turns to me and she says, really? I can't believe that. I can't believe that you ever fit into that. And she just kept going for 5 minutes. I was just like, thank you. Thank you so much. I got it. It's unbelievable. Thank you. True story. So it's not even going to take 20 years. It's really not. So you might as well let go of those things now. You might as well let go of those things now. And this doesn't just apply to looks. Your finances, yeah, it's important. But what if you marry your financial spec and they have an accident and can no longer work? Are you divorcing them? Your family vision, what you want, how many kids you want to have is important. What if something happens and you can't have those 5 biological children? Are you divorcing them? All these things. You need to marry someone who you're willing to love in a wheelchair. Honestly, you need to realize, are you really in this thing for sickness and health? For better or worse? For richer or poorer? And that's the thing, when you have all of these items as non-negotiables, what happens when you're in the marriage and they don't work out? Don't filter for temporary things. Okay, number three under why you need to rethink your spec. Number 3, you have limited options. No one wants to hear this. It's really romantic. You picture yourself someday in the future and you're talking to, let's say you're a man, you're talking to your wife and you're going to tell her, baby, I chose you out of all the women in the world. Let's get real. It ain't all the women in the world that wanted to marry you. But it just doesn't sound as good to say, I chose you out of the 3 other women that also kind of expressed some interest. You seem like the best choice. That's realistic, though. You don't have unlimited options. Most of us, really all of us, unless you're a major celebrity, maybe, we're going to have very few people that are going to come into our life and are going to fit the important filters and also be interested in us. That's going to be a finite number. The reason many people struggle with this idea now is in this online era, you feel like you can always swipe. I'll keep swiping and there'll be someone else and someone better. But that's not reality. The reality is a few potential matches that have the important qualities and are also open to you as a spouse. You don't have unlimited options. And that's why when you make things like eye color non-negotiable, you're limiting yourself even more. There was a YouTube video where this lady was in a room, and they brought 25 guys her age into the room. And the guys didn't say anything. They just sat in a circle around her. And then she would list off a quality that was a non-negotiable to her. And if the guy didn't meet that criteria, he'd get up and leave. By the time she was done, there was no one left. And she was really surprised. She said, I thought there'd be at least, 5 people left. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, she must have had crazy standards. This must have been the glasses person. But no, she really didn't compared to most people. Can I tell you something that blew my mind? 80% of women, they have found on surveys, want to marry a man who is over 6 feet tall. Can anyone guess the percentage of men in the United States that are over 6 feet tall. F- 15. So you're narrowing out 85% of the population with one filter, potentially. And a filter that doesn't even matter, again. That was from a place of pain right there. But honestly, you know, my husband is not quite 6 foot. And there's never been a day in our marriage where I've woken up and I've been like, you know, if he was just 2 inches taller, today would be so much better. It would make the difference. But it's true. A lot of these filters are not going to matter, and they're narrowing the pool so much for us. So much. And then many of you, what you want can't even be found in one person. You know, you hear things like, I want someone who's ambitious and really career-oriented, but also really family-oriented. You know, a medical doctor, brain surgeon, but stay-at-home mom. What is she going to do with the student debt? Honestly, I'm just asking. And then women, you're not exempt from this either. You guys are the worst, honestly, sometimes with this. Because you want a bad boy who's really smooth, but is also a devout Christian. You know, he acts like he has STDs, but he's a virgin. This person does not exist. And then you want this 1 in 1 billion person to also want to marry you. Good luck. You can babysit our kids. It's okay. Don't dismiss a person of good character quickly. If they have good character and they love God, really give it a chance. I'm not saying that automatically means you should marry them. There is more to it than that. But that is enough to really give someone a chance. You know, many, and going back to women a little bit, many of you want a finished product with guys. You know, they're really good in their career. They're really good at talking to women. The Christian men who have those things are mostly married. It's their wife that taught them how to talk to women. If you make the smoothness of worldly men your standard for chemistry, you will probably marry a worldly man. It's just the truth. Someone who loves God is not going to be as practiced talking to you as the guy that's had 10 girlfriends. He's just not. And you know, they did a study where a psychologist followed couples for 10 years. And he interviewed them when they first met, and he interviewed them about how all the dates went and followed their whole relationship. And what he found was the people who were successfully married over a decade later, when you asked them about how their first date was at that decade later time, they said it was great, like there was instant chemistry, it was amazing. But when he pulled the record of what they had actually said after the first date, a lot of them had reported that it was awkward, they weren't sure about the relationship, and it was just kind of a mediocre date. This is not a movie. A great marriage does not have to have a fairy tale beginning. You know, some do, and that's great, but not all have to. So be willing to give a little grace on a first date. Everyone's nervous. They might be extra weird because they're nervous. If they're not a serial killer and they seem nice, go on a second date and see if it improves. So, number four under why you need to rethink your spec. A lot of your spec is culturally engineered. A lot of your spec is culturally engineered. You know, in the early 2000s in America, a lot of people really liked like super, super thin women. Remember, like anorexia was huge. Yes, and they had the low-cut jeans, whereas now it's like you're curvy and your jeans are up here. What changed? Did people change genetically? No, this was only like 15, 20 years ago. We've not evolved since then. What changed was culture. What changed is what culture was pushing. Which begs the question, how much of your spec is even you? And how much of it is just what you've been presented with? You know, I said earlier, I envisioned a white cowboy. Why? Well, probably because I grew up watching Western movies. Probably because all the men in my family are white country boys. You know, they can shoot guns and go hunting. That had a huge impact on me. And I could have gone the rest of my life thinking that that's just how I was wired, when that wasn't true. It wasn't that I couldn't find anything else attractive. It was that I had a mental model from my childhood that was staying with me. And you see, the more you are exposed to something, the more likely you are to have affinity for it. And this is a big problem today, because we are being exposed to so much fake stuff. So much fake stuff. You see, even Kim Kardashian does not look like Kim Kardashian. And a lot of you are thinking like, okay, yeah, I know there's Photoshop. But it's more than Photoshop. It's the makeup, it's the lighting, it's the right angle. If we're honest with ourselves, none of us really look like our best Instagram picture. You know, that one that took like 20 takes to get? We don't really look like that in person. And we're in an age where people are seeing more images online of people than they are seeing people in real life. And this is really distorting what you think is normal. It is really messing up your standards for physical beauty, especially. And you see, I like to use fake rings, because then if I lose them, I don't really care. And I'm really bad about misplacing stuff. That's why I never buy more than like $5 sunglasses. So this ring here is $2. And I have a real wedding ring that is over $1,000. And I was looking at it the other day, and what I thought to myself after looking at these fake rings for so long is, wow, the stone is kind of small. But that's the thing. When you're always looking at something fake, reality will never satisfy you. It will never satisfy you. And there's so much illusion out there. So media team, help me pull up the picture that I have in the notes right after that. Okay, so this is a YouTube influencer that I used to follow to learn how to put on makeup. And they put up this picture, you know, without makeup and with makeup. And you can see it's a pretty big difference, right? But the plot thickens. Years later, I found out this person is actually a man. Yes. I was shocked. I have learned all my makeup skills from a man. He's really good at makeup. I never would have guessed. And that's my point. You can't trust what you see online, okay? But the makeup skills were really on point, I'm just saying. And women, don't think it's just men that need to think about this. It's you too. Because many of you are comparing real men you see to actors and models. And here's the thing. A real man with a real 9-to-5 job and other responsibilities is not going to be shredded like an actor or a model. They work out like 6 hours a day. Only someone whose profession is six-pack can do that. If you marry such a person, they're going to be a horrible father. Be like, I can't pick up the kids today. I got to go to the gym. I'm sorry. Stop feeding your mind with illusions and live in reality. Number five for why you need to rethink your spec. Number 5, you can never satisfy consumerism with covenant. You can never satisfy consumerism with covenant. See, consumerism is that mindset that says, I want this, I want that, I. That's not what marriage is about. Like we said earlier, when we go to God with product specification, we're going to Him as a consumer. But remember, you're not ordering a custom product. You're not. You're looking to be the custodian of a covenant created by God. And this is where we need to look to Christ. Christ is our example in all things. And Christ was not a consumer. Let's look at Matthew 20:28. Matthew 20:28. Let's read together. 1, 2, go. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Look at that again. Did not come to be served, but to serve. This is our example in all of life, including marriage. When you get in that marriage, it's not about pleasing yourself. It's about pleasing the other person. And that's why, if you enter marriage as a consumer, no matter who you marry, you're going to struggle. No matter who you marry. Marriage is a covenant. A lot of people incorrectly think of marriage as 50-50. But the truth is, marriage, the right mindset to have about it, is that it's 100-0. I give 100% effort no matter what I think the other person's doing. I love selflessly no matter how I feel about my spouse in that moment. You'll never have that mindset with consumerism. Consumerism will always be about pleasing yourself. So, rethink your spec. Stop letting your spec stand in the way of your spouse. All right, let's go on to the next section. So, next section, filter for what matters. Filter for what matters. Okay, we've talked about filters you need to get rid of. Let's talk about the ones you do need to have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this, and then we're going to expand on each point and talk about it. But let's run through it. So first of all, you need to have spiritual friendship. Spiritual friendship. Secondly, you need to have purpose. You need to have encouragement. And lastly, you need to have Christ-likeness. Christ-likeness. And then let's look at what we just spelled. S-P-E-C. This is how we're going to redeem Spec and make it helpful for you. So, how do I apply these filters? How do I look for these things? Let's talk about spiritual friendship. So spiritual friendship is asking, do I enjoy this person's company? Can I open up to them and tell them about anything that comes up in my life? And not only that, but is the friendship able to go deeper, all the way to the matters of the soul, or is it just surface level? You know, we established that your spouse has to be your best friend, and it's so true. If you don't marry someone who you just enjoy talking to, it's going to be a lonely marriage. And yeah, you should not expect to feel that way on the first date. Friendships aren't built overnight. However, if you are not seeing the potential for that friendship after a few dates, you should cut it off. Because this is one of the most important aspects that you need to have in a spouse. And this is another reason why it is important not to let things get physical when you're dating. Because you need to spend that time talking to each other a lot, and really getting to know each other. And I think an area where people mess up a little bit here is it is good to go out and do fun things and have memorable dates. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's kind of a problem when every date is that way. Because then it's hard to know, do I really like this person's company, or do I just enjoy novel activities? Some of your dates should be at more low-key places. Like just go to a coffee shop and talk. See if you really enjoy the person's company for themselves. Because when you're married, a lot of your time is going to be spent doing very mundane things. You need to be married to someone who you can enjoy doing the dishes with. It can't be I only enjoy going out to a fancy restaurant or going, indoor skydiving or whatever the case may be. So don't make all of your dates some high-key activity. Make sure you're spending time just getting to know each other. And also, when you're on the date, there's a tendency to sit there and to plot what you are going to say next, especially when you want to impress a person. You're not really listening to them. You're just thinking about the next thing you can say to make yourself sound interesting. Don't do that. Yes, you need to talk, and they need to get to know you, but you also need to get to know them. Let's look at Proverbs 18, verse 2 in the NLT. Fools have no interest in understanding. They only want to air their own opinions. Don't be a fool on the date. Listen to them. Get to know who they are. Find out. It's important. Which brings us to point number 2, purpose. Purpose. So you see, every friendship has a foundation. Friendships really aren't about just being interested in each other, if we think about them more deeply. Almost all of our friendships have a common ground that brought us together. Friendship is less about two people staring at each other and more about two people looking at a common horizon together. And this is why purpose is so important. Purpose is the only thing enduring enough to ground a marriage in. There's other things you might have in common with someone that might give you really good vibes with them, but it's too small for a lifetime. So for instance, you might have a friend you really like talking about movies with, but you're not going to talk about movies with someone for 5 decades. It's got to be based on purpose. And this can be a problem with student relationships. Because student relationships, I think a lot of them fizzle out after school because the relationship was really about the struggle of studenthood and your common social circle. And then when that ends, you see, well, you know, we don't actually have that much in common. That's not always the case, but I do see that sometimes. But beware of this. It can happen with any relationship. Make sure that you actually have things in common that are deep. You have purpose in common. And that's why you've got to talk about your faith when you're dating. You meet people, they've been dating 6 months, and they've never had a spiritual conversation. You're wasting your time. You're not finding out anything. You have got to talk about where you're going in life, your main priority in life, how you're going to serve God. You have to have these conversations when you're dating. Being on the same mission spiritually together is one of the most unifying adventures you can have for your marriage. If you are on a spiritual mission together, your marriage won't get boring. You'll always have something to do. Purpose is so important. And you see, purpose is important because it's the only thing that's flexible enough too. A lot of other goals come and go. But purpose can sustain the marriage because no matter what happens in your life, there is always a way to glorify God with it. I knew a couple, and I met them, they were in their late 60s, and they were, the husband was a pastor at a church I was going to, and he and his wife ran the premarital counseling class. And they told a story at that class I'll never forget. They had had a child die when that child was 2 years old because of a genetic disease that they were both carriers for. And it was a very rare condition. So if they had married just about anyone else, their children wouldn't have gotten it. But they happened to both be carriers. And so when they were grieving the death of this child, they were also having to grieve the possibility of any future children together, because the likelihood of another child having that was very high between the two of them. And they said that as they were going through that process, they saw that the statistics of people who go through something like that is like a 99% divorce rate. Because if you're believing in like the universe and soulmates, you know, what other sign could you have that you picked the wrong person? But they did not believe in that. They believed in covenant. They believed in purpose. And so they came together through that horrible trial, and they said, how can we glorify God with this? And they went and they adopted 4 children. And at the time I knew them, they had been married over 40 years. And these two, you know, before hearing that story, I already really admired their marriage because they were obviously older and had been married a long time. And there was so much playfulness and joy still in that marriage. See, a lot of you might think that kids are a big enough thing to base your marriage on. But do you know how many couples divorce once their kids leave the house? It's not enough. It's important if you want to have children, but it's not enough. only purpose is enduring and flexible enough to base your marriage on. And then let's move on to encouragement. Encouragement. Does this person build you up? Are they, as the song goes, the wind beneath your wings? Now, this does not mean that they never correct you. You want a spouse who can correct you. But you should not feel demoralized by them. You should feel challenged. And they should be one of the biggest supporters in the dream that God has given you for your life. So let's look at Hebrews 10:25 in the NLT. Hebrews 10:25 in the NLT. It says, "And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." Now, the context of this verse is the church, the body of Christ. But if this is the expectation of fellow believers, how much more your spouse? You have to marry someone who encourages you, and you have to be an encourager. Number four, Christ-likeness, Christ-likeness. Now, I think of all the points, I think this one gets thrown around the most. We're always hearing this. I just want someone who's Christ-like, Jesus boy, Jesus girl. People are always saying this. But what does it really mean? How do we actually find that? It means you can see a trajectory of sanctification in their life. And I'm going to explain what that means. They can talk about character issues they've had in the past that they have overcome by the Spirit. Not only that, they can talk about character issues they have right now that they are working on overcoming. And there is spiritual mentorship and accountability in that process. You need someone who can take correction. You see, no matter who you marry, there's going to be some eye-opening experiences with them. Now, if you did a good job dating, these shouldn't be earth-shattering, but dating can never reveal what marriage can. It wasn't designed to. It's okay. What you need to know is this. You need someone who can grow with you. So, for example, when I married my husband, before we got married, I thought he had really figured out life completely and just was spiritually mature and had, no need for further growth. But then once we got married, I realized that he was actually hypercritical of himself, which, I could have probably overlooked that one, but also of me, which was much harder to live with. But because my husband is submitted to God, I was able to point that out to him, and the Holy Spirit also helped some. And he was able to overcome it and change, and we were able to grow together through that. I really lacked discipline when we got married, which kind of invited the criticism sometimes. But anyway, but because I was willing to take correction, the Holy Spirit and my husband helped me to grow and really change that area of my life. And that's really what you want in a marriage. You want to be helping each other with the process of sanctification. And you see, that's what you need to look out for. That's how you see the Christ-likeness. Someone who is willing to take feedback and change. I would take a person for marriage who seems, less perfect than someone else, but has shown a track record of humility and repentance over the more perfect seeming person. Because when you get married, that illusion of perfection guaranteed to fade. You're going to get up close to them. You're going to see what a sinner they are. It's going to happen. And what's going to make the difference in that moment is how you can grow together. Because you see, everyone changes. Everyone changes throughout their life. And it is only submission to the Holy Spirit that guarantees those changes will be good. All right. This brings us to the conclusion. So you might have heard all this. You're thinking, that's great. This sounds good. I'm willing to look for this person. But where are they? And I know that can be a hard question to answer. There's a few things you can do to help yourself, though. There's a few ways you can help yourself. Number one, expand your network. This generation is really bad about this. We love to hide at home on our phone. And I relate to this. There's days that I'm so tired after church, I go to the car and I pull out my phone. I understand. But it's not helpful. It's not helpful. If you want to find a like-minded partner, join like-minded groups. This is why serving in church is so helpful. It's going to put you into contact with people with the same convictions as you. Now, some of you are sitting there and you're thinking, I'm in a service unit, and there is no one fine here. Well, like we talked about, maybe you need to rethink your filter. But secondly, maybe it's not going to be a person in the unit with you. It might be someone they know. But I tell you what, when you're going to recommend someone to your single friend, you're not going to think about the person that runs away and hides at home and you barely know them. You're going to recommend the person you know and you've seen competence and character from. Expand your social network. It is going to be often through a social tie of some kind that you're going to meet your future spouse. Expand your social network. And then number 2, under how do I find this person? Become a conversationalist. Become a conversationalist. A lot of us that are not the best with conversations assume that people who are were just born that way. And I understand. It does not come the most naturally to me, especially when I'm tired. So I get it. I really do. But good talkers are not born. They are made. It can be learned. It is a skill. And it's a very, very valuable skill. It affects pretty much every area of your life. So put some effort into this area. If you know you struggle with this, get a book about it. A good book on this is How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's others too, but get something. Go through some kind of personal development on this. And ask your friends for advice. Learning to be a good friend is the training grounds for being a good spouse in the future. Number 3, put your best foot forward. When you do go out, dress nicely. Smell good. That's the one that you hope you don't have to say, but you kind of do. Ladies, it's good to wear some makeup. It just highlights your features in such a nice way. And yeah, people should look beyond that. We just talked about that. But let's be real. They don't. So look nice. Look nice. There's nothing wrong with catching someone's eye. There's nothing wrong with that. And also act your best. Act your best. You never know who is watching. And God certainly always is. And with that, we're going to round off. We're going to move into the Q&A. So all those questions you've written down, be ready.